Welcome aboard, everybody. We have a massive presidential election coming up here in, of course, about 2 weeks, a little less than 2 weeks. Of course, we are voting for president, but that is not all we're voting for. We are voting for some national seats and, of course, some state seats. All of Missouri's 163 state house seats are up for re-election on November 3rd of this year. And one of those races are with us right now. We're going to talk a little bit about the 130th district that represents Western Greene County, and we'll be more specific with that here in a little bit. Now, before I do anything else, I want to take a moment to share my screen. What you are looking at right now, just some advice for anybody who is joining us. We invite you, please submit a question in our chat and feel free to ask the candidates. This is a better experience if you switch this over to speaker view, and feel free to put yourself on mute. Once again, please, if you want to participate, please participate in the chat. We are just going to pull out questions from the chat over the course of the debate when we feel like we got a really good question to throw to our speakers. Once again, we are having a conversation for the 130th district for the Missouri House of Representatives. This forum is hosted by OTC, but specifically the OTC Social Sciences Department and the OTC Student Organization, Nonpartisan Politics Club, Politically Active. This forum is a coalition event. The League of Women Voters of Southwest Missouri has combined with OTC, Leadership Springfield, Missouri State University, the Junior League of Springfield, Missouri, OTC, like I said, Drury, NAACP, KSMU, the Springfield Greene County Library, and Be Civil, Be Heard. This is, of course, in preparation for a general election that is coming down the pipeline on Tuesday, November 3rd of this year. We have two participants. We have Bishop Davidson, who is the Republican candidate for this seat, and Dave Gragg, who's the Democratic candidate for this seat. Just some information, if you're listening to this debate and you can't wait to register to vote, you're out of time. I hope you have already registered to vote. But if you want more information about whether you're registered or not, please visit or contact the Greene County Clerk's office at 1126 North Boonville Avenue. You may also vote absentee if you've qualified for that all the way through November 2nd. And if you vote in person, obviously you only got one day to shoot your shot there. And that's Tuesday, November 3rd. Polls are open from 6 in the morning to 7 in the evening. More information, you can visit Greene County's website to determine where, of course, you vote. If you have more questions, just call the Greene County Clerk's office. With that in mind, once again, this forum was recorded. It will be recorded, and of course, it will be posted to various websites, including the library.org and leadershipspringfield.org/blog. No part of this video may be reproduced or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic or mechanical. Once again, we are going to be previewing this race for your general election coming down the pipeline. And thank you to our participants for taking part in this forum and sharing their views with the public. This hasn't been possible for every race, but it has been with you guys. All right. So with that in mind, I'm going to open up the floor for both candidates to start with an opening statement. Let's start with, again, the Republican of the race, Bishop Davidson. You have 2 minutes, sir, to introduce yourselves for this debate.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for having me. I wish we could be together, but I understand why we can't. My name is Bishop Davidson. I live in Republic, Missouri, and I jumped into this race 14 months ago. And about a month before that, I had hair down to my shoulders and a big beard. So I was not considering running, but decided to jump in because I have a sense that there's a holistic conservative philosophy that I don't feel like is really talked about in today's modern political discourse. And what that really means, what I called myself as the true conservative, is that conservatism isn't just about limiting government. It's about limiting government for a very specific reason. And that's to strengthen our communities by strengthening the institutions in our communities. You might be asking what that means. Well, I think, now I'm just going to go full into the spiel. we as individuals, we don't find a sense of purpose or meaning or place or identity by looking inward. I think we don't find it in the state either. Instead, we find it in all those institutions that exist in between, like our families, our churches, our schools, our places of work, our neighborhoods. But these institutions, I believe, are strongest when they have responsibilities to rise up to or reasons to coalesce around. The challenge is when you have a state that begins encroaching on those responsibilities, I think it chisels away at our communities and it leaves our individuals more isolated than before, which I think it means increased depression, anxiety, suicide. And we've seen that in today's day and age. And so I jumped into this race because I think there is a broader conversation that's not being had. The question seems to always revolve around limiting government or empowering government instead of asking the question, why do either? So I'm looking forward to today's discussion and happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that opening statement. Let's throw it to, again, the Democratic candidate in this race, Dave Gragg. 2 minutes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much again for having this. Yeah, this is definitely not the race I was planning on running when we decided to put my name on the ballot. My name is Dave Gragg. I grew up in Montrose, Missouri, a little bitty town between Kansas City and Springfield, a little ways off of the 13 highway. Went to Truman State University, spent 11 years as a newspaper reporter and editor in Kansas and New Mexico and Texas, and came back home to Missouri and started an insurance agency not too long after that. And so that's what I've been doing. I wasn't really planning on running, certainly not while I've got a 5-year-old at home, but I did help Tyler Gunlock when he ran in 2018, and when he decided he wasn't going to run again, I said that I would. Bishop likes to talk about the principles of conservatism, which is really funny because we're in a state where we have a supermajority and they kind of roll over and do whatever they want to do, which is exactly what conservatives say they don't want government to do. If I ask people if you trust government in Western Greene County, I usually get a no, a lot of times with an expletive in front of it. But we keep handing power to a single party, and the system of checks and balances that we've got in our government doesn't work particularly well when we've got one party that's all that can just hold on to that power. So that is why I'm running. I see a whole lot of stuff that the Republicans are not doing, and I'm not happy about it. And one thing about little towns is there is nobody else to do it. So you don't say somebody should do something, you just get up and do it. And so I decided I need to get up and do it.
So once again, we are going to rotate questions between the two of you, and these questions will vary from 2 minutes to 1 minute to 1.5 minutes. Just be mindful, and of course, we'll have a timekeeper to help you guys stay on track in that regards. But we're going to start out with a question for Mr. Davidson. In terms of pure square mileage, you are running to represent the largest district in terms of square mileage in Greene County. Your district, just for anybody who's listening, it includes Willard, Republic, Ash Grove, Walnut Grove, as well as virtually all of the county west of Springfield. All of those cities and your part of the county have one thing in common. Absolutely none of them have mask mandates. This is at a time when rural communities are starting to experience the brunt of COVID-19 resurgence. Do you yourself favor a mask mandate in your district? Why or why not? 2 minutes, sir. Mr. Davidson, and you are currently muted.
2 minutes, is that right?
Yeah.
No, thank you. Yeah, I do not support mandating masks. No, I don't. I know that the conversation's been had throughout the county, and I know there's been certain conversations had in Republic. I can't speak as much to Willard or Ash Grove or even Walnut Grove for that matter. I know that when we're outdoor knocking, we've got masks, and different communities, I think, respond differently. But by and large, I think it's important that our communities have the autonomy and retain the autonomy to make these sorts of decisions. But the reason that I wouldn't particularly support a mask mandate goes even further to say that I think folks should be able to practice their own discretion in managing their health and managing the health of those around them as well. And so For that reason, I don't support mask mandates. We've seen in the last year the scientific community go back and forth, and I don't want to pretend to make an argument that's scientific or healthcare oriented because it's not my specialty. It's not something I know much about, but I do know that that doctors everywhere have gone back and forth over the last few months, and I know that they've shown that wearing a mask hasn't seemed, amongst those who have been confirmed COVID patients, hasn't seemed to be a part of stopping that. So I think they probably work in terms of keeping a healthy person, or rather a COVID patient, someone who's tested positive, from spreading it. And I think everyone should be diligent to be cautious, whether that's social distancing or wearing masks, and doing their research on their own, though. But no, I don't believe in a mask mandate for the particular municipalities.
Mr. Gragg, Ozark and Nixa are not in your district. They have rejected mask mandates until recently. They've elected to implement mask mandates, which again, we have no mask mandates currently in the district you're running for. Do you favor one? Why or why not, sir?
So like a good forum, I disagree with pretty much everything he just said. I have been advocating for a mask mandate for a couple months now, basically since our governor has declined all responsibility and pushed it on to the city commissioners, and they are basically volunteers who are not, they shouldn't have to deal with it. But our governor has abdicated all responsibility on it, so now it's up to the cities. Yeah, I was pretty happy when Nixa and Ozark did. I wish Republic did. My kids go to Republic schools, and I get an email every day about how many kids and how many staff have come up with positive tests on COVID. From what I have seen, they haven't been spread in the community. They haven't been spread in schools. They've been spread in the community, and then they go to school. The masks work because we're not getting clusters in the school. When Bishop says that doctors are going back and forth, no, originally doctors said masks don't protect you from the virus. And then as we got more information, they said masks still don't protect you from the virus, but what they do protect other people from getting the virus if you've got it. And that's why we need to have mask mandate. I'm a big fan of personal rights and personal responsibilities. The right to swing my arm ends at your face. We are literally affecting someone else by our actions, and by not having a mask mandate, when folks aren't taking responsibility for the actions, government has to step in. It's no different than drunk driving laws. It's no different than a speed limit.
We're going to go back to Mr. Davidson. Sir, staying on the subject of COVID-19, according to the nonprofit USA Facts, the pandemic is getting really bad for rural communities right now. This pandemic is spreading to rural America at a record-breaking pace. Nearly 70% of the nation's 2,000 counties, rural counties, are in the red zone, which the White House Coronavirus Task Force designates when the spread is out of control. Rural county infections outpace urban infections by 63%. 90% of Missouri's rural counties are in the red zone. 35 of them have been in the red zone for over a month. So, Mr. Davidson, again, for 1 minute, how can we possibly improve on our response to COVID-19?
Yeah, 1 minute's not very long. I think we need to allow flexibility within our healthcare system. I think we need to allow flexibility in our economy and allow flexibility within our schools as well. I think they're going to respond most appropriately, and they're going to be the most agile in terms of deciding how to address the problems that they see in each particular county. One thing I would offer is we've been told from the very start that we're going to get COVID. So the issue isn't necessarily getting it. The issue has more to do with its fatality rate, which has been going down. So I understand the concern, but it's not something that we want to act in fear from or bury our heads about. Instead, I think if we were to implement broader healthcare reform, we'd see a more responsive healthcare system. And that could be addressing certificate of need programs, that could be addressing scope of practice. I think if you implement some of these things, you're able to address it more head on. I'm out of time.
Let's throw it to Mr. Gragg. Once again, 90% of Missouri's rural counties are in the red zone. I don't know if Greene County qualifies as but you are certainly representing a rural area. How can we possibly improve on our response to COVID-19? 1 minute, sir.
A mask mandate would help. Yeah, we're just going to get it and get over it comment that Bishop made, and honestly that our governor made, is part of the problem. But the whole herd immunity thing is going to end up with tens of thousands of people dead. I'll be honest with you, I am scared of this disease because, you know, I've got parents that are going to be at risk. I've got a lot of clients that are going to be at risk. I do not want to get it and then spread it to them. And the more people that we have working to stop the spread of it, the less likely that happens. Pretending this isn't the mask mandate, masks should not be a political issue, but Republicans have turned it into one so that they can say, oh no, we're protecting your freedoms. Grandma died, sorry, but we're protecting your freedoms. It doesn't make any sense. Like I said, this is no different than any other law that we've got on the books. Thank you very much.
Staying with you, Mr. Gragg, if that's okay,
Yep.
Staying on the topic of healthcare as well. Another troubling trend for rural communities is how much harder it's getting to access proper healthcare at affordable rates. And now Missouri voters did vote in August to expand Medicaid, which at the very least would expand healthcare to rural areas of the state. Is this a development you welcome, or would you prefer a rollback of the Medicaid expansion that the voters had supported earlier this year?
Yeah, no, I've been pushing for Medicaid expansion for since before Parson tried to shove it back so people wouldn't pay attention to it on the August ballot. Because I'm from one of the little bitty rural counties. My town had about 400 people in it. So everything is interconnected. There is no economic development without a nearby hospital. And so these rural areas where people make less money and their jobs are more likely to be one-on-one or with a small company that doesn't offer its own health insurance, there are no affordable healthcare options. And so what we've got is all these people who are, especially the ones with kids, who make less than, they don't qualify for the subsidy through the healthcare.gov or Healthcare Affordable Care Act. And so that's what Medicaid was designed. That's how the law was designed, was to get those folks coverage through Medicaid. And that's a responsible use of tax dollars because Medicaid reimburses hospitals and doctors less than health insurance. And so when they're offering a subsidy to health insurance, they're paying the health insurance rate. With Medicaid, they're paying that lower rate. And we're going to get our money back by having a more productive workforce. We're going to have a healthier workforce. And we're going to be able to provide for themselves better because they have the healthcare they wouldn't have otherwise. And not to mention the 90% reimbursement that the feds are offering. The feds are offering that as an upfront. They'll make their money back. We'll make our money back by having a healthier, more productive workforce. So yeah, I'm absolutely in favor of Medicaid expansion. It will work, and looking forward to it.
I'm going to throw the same question to Mr. Davidson. Once again, the option became available for us about a decade ago. It took us about a decade in order for Missourians to finally get around to approving Medicaid expansion. Is that a development you welcome, or is that something that you personally would support reversing?
I think it's going to bring more problems than solutions. I think there is a problem, right, with our healthcare industry in general, but that problem mainly derives from the fact that you've got three big parties in healthcare, or three interested parties. You've got healthcare providers, you have insurers and patients, and not enough communication is going on between providers and patients. A lot of that communication is hindered by bureaucracy, by regulation, by over-regulation, I should say. And so whereas Medicaid expansion, I could see being a Band-Aid on a few of our problems, it creates other problems. And in the end, it's only a Band-Aid. It doesn't actually address the core problem of the healthcare system as a whole. So some of the problems I think it introduces, I think it does introduce some financial woes into the Missouri budget, especially in the short term. In terms of the long term, there's no guarantee that federal dollars will continue coming in. And then because I'm limited in time and I'd like to get more to some of those solutions, I think by and large, as a whole, we don't, if you look back through history, federal involvement in state issues and federal involvement in increasingly local issues and intimate issues is not a good path to follow. The feds don't have the right incentive in order to actually do things at a most efficient rate. I mentioned some of the policies that I think would create a more marketable and a better, more efficient healthcare system. I'll reiterate them. I think we should address scope of practice laws around who can practice what. I think we should address medical malpractice. That's one I hadn't mentioned before. I think we should look at certificate of need. Most states brought certificate of needs back in the 70s, and within 2 years, most of them repealed them. We're still delayed on getting rid of it. And that's my time. So thank you. I don't think I voted no. How about that there?
Thank you so much. Let's go back to Mr. Gragg for this next topic, because the census, for anybody listening who may not know, it's the United States decennial counting of the American population in order to draw new district lines. It's also used to properly distribute federal funding throughout America and state funding, of course, throughout Missouri. And it's wrapping up this year. Most estimates seem to predict Missouri losing a U.S. House seat, just like we did last decade. And it's because our population is just not keeping pace with the rest of America. But Mr. Gragg, the 130th has seen growth in areas like Republic. If elected, how you plan to translate that success to Missouri as a whole? 1 minute. Mr. Gragg, I'm so sorry. Could you start your answer over again? You are on mute.
Yep. Sorry about that. You're saying that Republic and Willard have grown. The rest of the state's grown too. It just hasn't grown as much as some of the other population centers. Republic is doing a whole lot of things right. They're bringing in this big warehouse that they won't tell you who it actually is, but everybody knows who it is. And that's happening because Republic has, for years, made investments in infrastructure. They've got a good school system out there, and that's bearing fruit in the companies that they're bringing in. Our state hasn't been doing that. We're not funding our education the way we should be. We're not funding our infrastructure the way we should be. We're not making sure that rural areas have the broadband access that they need to be able to retain retain their high school grads, because you graduate, you leave. I'll be honest, that's what I did. High-speed internet lets you do that.
Same question, Mr. Davidson. Once again, we're seeing growth in Republic. We're seeing growth in, as Mr. Gragg said, in Willard. If elected, how will you translate that success to Missouri as a whole? 1 minute. And I'm so sorry, Mr. Davidson, you are on mute.
Yeah, so I think Mr. Gragg hits on a few different things. Republic, a lot of the growth that it's seen has been by freeing up the market more than it was before. I think in a very typical small town fashion, there was a lot more good old boy politics before. But I know that with some of the new administration, they now pride themselves on turning permits around within 14-day period, which is, just incredible if you compare that to other municipalities. And so similarly, if we want to see growth, we're going to have to start fostering a better economic climate that encourages business not only to keep their businesses here, but business people to move their businesses here and move their businesses across state lines. And I think there's a real simple path forward to doing that. And I think a lot of the policies and a lot of the practices we've seen here in Western Greene County can be implemented at a more statewide level. So I think that growth has been driven primarily by a strong economy.
Mr. Davidson, can we stay with you, sir? And I would like to stay on the subject of district lines. because back in 2018, Missouri voters supported an initiative called Clean Missouri to try to get the district drawing process, quote unquote, out of the hands of politicians. On the ballot this year is Cleaner Missouri, which will appear on voters' ballots as Amendment 3. Can you explain what this amendment would do, and do you support it? Please explain why. 90 seconds.
Yes, I absolutely support it. What Amendment 3 does is it fixes two very big problems in 2018's Amendment 1. I'm not going to speak about the sweetener of the bill. A lot of folks say politicians are trying to trick them. I'm not unconvinced that they're not right. But the main body of the legislation is that it changes the nonpartisan demographer to bipartisan commissions, 20 in each house. I think it is far better to have a group of bipartisan people drawing our district lines than a supposed nonpartisan person. None of us are actually nonpartisan, and that's okay. We have different views. We might as well take account of those different views and instead promote a bipartisan board. Those who are concerned about the governor appointed aspect, I would draw their attention to who supplies the applicants or the pool of applicants, and it actually comes from the parties themselves. Whereas in the nonpartisan demographer field, that pool of applicants is narrowed and determined by a partisan politician, our state auditor. Second, it changes the criteria that demographer has to abide by prioritizing compact contiguous districts, geographically close districts that allow for our districts and our representatives to be members of their communities. Otherwise, we'll proceed forward with a presumed. And that's my time. It's a big topic. Thank you.
Very big topic. And as a result, let's give Mr. Gragg an opportunity once again. Clean Missouri, passed back in 2018. Cleaner Missouri on the ballot for this November. Do you support it? What's your opinion of it?
Okay, so yeah, like Bishop said, this is a big topic. We spent an hour arguing about this several months ago. So yeah, cramming it in 60 seconds. So the argument that lines are not going to be contiguous and compact, it's still in Clean Missouri that they have to be contiguous and compact. It just requires that they also be competitive. Bishop likes to tell folks they the lines are going to go from Kansas City all the way down to Republic, and in no definition of the word contiguous or compact does Kansas City to Republic work. Now, speaking of definitions, one of the things that Dirty Missouri Amendment 3 does is it changes the definition of competitive to 15% efficiency gap, which is a demography term, but 15% is bloody insane. Now, the thing with Amendment 3 that really bothers me is Republicans are using a whole lot of arguments that are no different than the arguments they used 3 years ago. They lost those arguments or they didn't make them. Neither of those are an acceptable excuse to try to overturn a constitutional amendment that has been voted on by the people. And 60% of the people in Western Greene County voted for it. So for them to say, no, that's not really what you wanted to do, it's insulting to the voters again.
Mr. Davidson, let's go back to you because your district's very rural and it contains a lot of farmland, and that makes it a good snapshot of Missouri. As you may know, Missouri has the second most farms of any state in America, according to Statistica, and 90% of farms are family owned. And when they're surveyed about the challenges they face, their concerns are wide and varied. But one survey asked farmers to rank the top issues that would impact their business in the coming years. And the number one issue of that survey was new government regulations and mandates. This is a real cause of concern in the coming years anyway, due to the expected action to combat climate change, promote clean energy. How would you like to see future mandates and regulations on our farming industry handled? 1 minute, sir.
By and large, right, I'm going to be pushing for more and more local decision making. I was at a cattlemen's meeting not long ago, and they were talking about these issues, and they were talking about and sharing practices on how to keep healthy soil and nitrogen levels low, and be concerned about water runoff and various other aspects of the farming community. These were all a lot of topics that I'm not so familiar with beyond just reading about it. I'm not a farmer myself, but I think it showed me something really tremendous, and that's the fact that there's no one who cares more about the land than the people who are deriving their livelihood from that land. There's no use of them to destroy the property, to destroy the soil, to destroy the water, because they're going to be using it for decades, and if their families go on, decades more after that fact. So when it comes to regulation and mandates, we have to be very certain, very clear, in accordance with the farming community, that this is a benefit and not harmful in the least. Otherwise, I think we should defer, by and large, the community.
Mr. Gragg, thank you so much, sir. Mr. Gragg, how would you like to see future mandates and future regulations on our farming industry handled? 60 seconds.
Okay, so where I will agree with Bishop is that, and I've said this over and over again, nobody cares more about the land than the family farmer who's planning on passing that land down to his or her kids. What we have a problem with is factory farmers come in and they're not as concerned with the long-term health. And you know, my granddad used to remember a little bit about the Dust Bowl days when people were trying to grab as much money as they can out of the land and then just left it be. That's the concern we've got with factory farming going on now. Now, there are other issues and that farmers and ranchers have, and how they're concerned about how fertilizer runoff affects the waterways and all that kind of stuff. They're real concerns and we've got to work with them. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we are looking at the long-term health of the land and the water. That's a long way of saying I've got a lot of learning to do on the subject too, but I am looking forward to that learning process.
Let me stay with you, Mr. Gragg, with your permission, of course. Missouri has, just changing subjects, as a wide-ranging discussion like this is going to have to do. Missouri is one of the highest rates of gun-related deaths in the nation. New data earlier this year from the CDC ranked Missouri 6th in the U.S. for gun death rate, including intentional and accidental shootings. As a potential legislator, how would you address this epidemic? Sorry, sir, 90 seconds.
Yeah, you bet. So this is a tough one. One of the fun things about Missouri is it has very urban areas, it has very rural areas, and they have different relationships with guns and different histories with guns. I am a very big fan of red flag laws. I see them no differently than a search warrant. When you have to go to a judge and tell the judge, this is why we want this, a red flag law does no different. Accidental gun deaths, honestly, I don't know the answer to that one, but red flag laws help with suicides. They help with domestic violence situations, because way too many of those, or way too many of our homicides, start as domestic violence. Those are the bigger concern that I think the state can help with and should be able to help with easily, is especially on the red flag laws. And I'll actually turn that over.
Mr. Davidson, same question. Once again, with the gun-related deaths, Missouri 6th in the nation in that regard. How would you address this epidemic should you be elected?
He's right. It is difficult, and it's a very important question, and it stems out of this broader question of how do we address, I think, problems of mental health in this state, problems of drug addiction or drug usage in this state, problems of community erosion. I think by and large, by addressing those core issues, you're looking at a better cure than if you were to say implement red flag laws or stricter gun control laws or things of that nature. And that's because one is pretending to address the problem, and the other sees the problem as it is, which is a problem of communities at their heart and at their soul. If you look backwards in time, you don't see a lot less guns per capita, but you do see a lot less gun violence. I would say we should focus on the causes of that violence as opposed to the tools of those violent acts, whether that be homicide or suicide, which I believe suicide accounts for most of those intentional acts of violence. intentional gun deaths. So I would say I would be more prone to talking about mental health and mental illness and how we address those problems. But then by and large, I would rely on my broader platform of fostering community. Thank you.
Mr. Gragg, can I go back to you for our next question? Because in 2019, Missouri passed a heartbeat bill, which I guess now we can call a heartbeat law. Bans abortions in the state of Missouri past 8 weeks, which is when a fetal heartbeat can usually be detected. We're almost certainly adding a new Supreme Court justice in the coming days, the United States Supreme Court. And the new justice is expected to be a vote in favor of overturning Roe v. Wade, or at least weakening the ability of Americans to pursue abortions as they see fit across the country in an effort to protect the unborn. It's worth noting that the law doesn't offer exceptions for rape or incest. What are your thoughts on the law, sir? 2 minutes.
Abortion is definitely the one issue I hear a lot, and it's the one spot that Democrats are a little bit of yeah. I'm going to skip all that. The heartbeat bill is a bad idea, and here's why. I am a big fan of individual rights and individual responsibilities. A person, when life begins, is obviously up for debate. No one has the answer that everyone agrees with. Doctors, pastors, anybody, no one has the answer. So it has to be up to the individual as to when life begins, not the government. And Bishop and I can talk about this all we want, but ultimately, this is not something that's going to affect us. As I've talked to people, I have talked to women who remember pre-Roe. And I talked to one woman who was a nurse, and there was the girl that was so desperate to not let anyone know she was pregnant. She used a coat hanger on herself and died because she punctured her uterus. There was a woman who had to have an emergency hysterectomy because she used Drano. We're not going to outlaw abortion. We are going to outlaw safe abortion. I grew up Catholic. I believe life begins at conception, but I also understand that's my belief, and I don't get to impose that on anyone else. And so, yeah, not a fan of the heartbeat bill.
Mr. Davidson, same question to you. Once again, the heartbeat bill passed in 2019. Bans abortions in the state past 8 weeks. We did mention the fact that it doesn't offer exceptions for some things that maybe you'd expect exceptions for. What are your thoughts?
And then you were also asking broader questions about Roe v. Wade, I believe. I wonder if the courts would strike it down, or if they would make it more of a state issue. I sort of lean towards the latter. In regard to the heartbeat bill itself, I'm a strong proponent of it, and that's because I'm adamantly pro-life. In disagreement with my opponent, I would say the fact that we can know I'm alive and I'm a living person who deserves rights now, and we can say the same regarding an unborn child as well. So I am a 100% pro-life candidate. That being said, I'm always curious about the constitutional bounds of federal government and the constitutional responsibilities of state governments and so on. So I would be watching eagerly to see exactly what some of our brightest legal minds would decide on a subject like that. And I don't know that I can speak to it just because I'm not smart enough when it comes to that. But like I said, if it has to do with Missouri policy specifically, I will be looking for legislation and supporting legislation, whether that's by co-sponsorship or passage or what have you. And my sort of measure is, do I think that this bill could save a single life? And if the answer to that is yes, then it is something that I will be in support of. Does that mean there aren't difficult situations out there that Dave mentions as well? No, of course not. And these are other problems that would have to be addressed as time goes on. Does that mean that we have to have a holistic pro-life agenda? that includes conversations about more financially accessible adoption, yes, I think that too. But I am an adamant pro-life candidate.
Mr. Davidson, let's stay with you for a moment. We did get a question earlier in our discussion from Lisa, who asks you specifically, what is the role of government in your opinion? Let's give you 1 minute for that, please.
Okay, yeah. The role of government in the most fundamental terms is to administer justice and to protect property. And this is derived from a long political philosophy, a long tradition of liberalism going back to folks like John Locke. So I think that is the role of government. It's really as simply stated in that way. I don't know if I want to complicate it all that much. I know that there was another question that I had looked back on, and I think it was maybe from Lisa as well, but I don't know for certain. And it was asking about improved mental health and how we can have stronger communities without more government. And I actually think these things are inversely proportional, that communities are strong when they have purposes and responsibilities. And then states take away those responsibilities, those communities necessarily weaken. And so it works in a way like this, in that the only path to strengthening our communities is to limit our government where it stands today.
Mr. Gragg, same question. What is the role of government in your opinion?
So you've got different tiers of what government does. The one is top tier is the reason it started was to protect life and liberty and property. But below that, there are things that we can only do together that we cannot do with the strict libertarian idea that some of the folks on the other side of the aisle have, like roads and education and even healthcare. The space program. I'd like the space program. It wouldn't have happened with straight up libertarians in charge of things, because they're going to expect Elon Musk to magically appear 50 years before his time. So there are different tiers of government, and as government gets more powerful, you're giving up more on the personal freedom, and so it's always going to be a cost benefit analysis as to what's the cost and what's the benefit. Medicaid expansion, for example, the benefit outweighs the cost in terms of healthier communities, healthier, more productive workers, and then you get kids who are able to do better in the next generation.
Mr. Gragg, let's stay with you for a moment, because especially when you speak about education, you have said that we need to make better investments in education and infrastructure. Give us an idea over the next 2 minutes of the kind of investments you'd like to see.
Okay, so honestly, those were some of the things that I was starting with pre-COVID. Anything else? Those were some of the reasons that I'm running, because what I see Republicans doing, and I'll keep it short, distracting people with the culture wars, and so the people don't focus on the fact that they're not doing their jobs on health and or on education and infrastructure. We've got. And Bishop was on the same Farm Bureau call that I was on. They talked about how many bridges that our MoDOT is just trying to hold together long enough that maybe we can give them some extra money so they can actually fix the bridges and make them better. I think the quote was, "We know we have a lot of C's, we're trying to hold them there." Education, we've got teachers who are making way below most college educated folks are, and we're expecting them to pony up for their own supplies. One of the things that I've got with my business is I'm able to help teachers buy supplies, so they're not having to come out with their own pocket. So we have bought Lysol wipes, and we have bought Kleenexes, and we have bought games, and we've bought. Why in the world is a private business having to do this? I'm happy to do it, but why in the world is a private business having to do this? These are our kids. This is the investments that we should be making as a community, as a society. And we've got a legislature that claims to fully fund education, but what they've actually done is just made it a smaller pot and say, oh, pot's full, everybody's happy now. And that's nowhere near the truth. So that's what I mean by funding education, investing in infrastructure. And then we've got broadband internet in rural areas that needs to come up as well.
Same subject, Mr. Davidson. What kind of investments would you like to see in the realms of education and or infrastructure? Your floor, sir, for 2 minutes.
Mute.
Yep, I'm there. No, and I just put a comment in. Dave made some great points regarding the tiered system of government when it comes to the structure. And when you ask me what I think the role of Missouri state government, or what I think some of the priorities ought to be, those priorities are education and infrastructure. These are common goods that can't be serviced by the private sector. He's totally right, and I'm in total agreement. America has had a public school system since before it was America. I think 1639 was the first public school system in Massachusetts. In terms of how we invest in our public schools, I think there's a lot of forms of investment that can take. You know, I'd love to say I want to pay teachers more. I have trouble saying that because I hear everyone say that all the time, yet teachers aren't paid more. And so I don't completely understand the complexities of the situation. I don't understand the budget in its entirety. And so I'm always reticent to talk in some sort of certain way about that. That being said, I think there are other issues at play. DESE puts out a report about retention and recruitment of teachers. And within that top 5 category is autonomy in the classroom, is administration, is curriculum freedom, curricular freedom. And for those reasons, I would be interested in seeing our schools take on more local responsibility, allowing our school boards to have more of a decision-making process in the education of our children. I do have 30 seconds, so I can't speak completely to schools. I'm going to try and switch over to infrastructural projects. Rural broadband was mentioned. I see rural broadband as an infrastructure project, similar to the way that roads give us access to economy and communities. So too has internet, and good internet become a similarly necessary path to have access to community or the economy. And for that reason, I think we need to make it a priority in terms of a broader infrastructural project.
Mr. Davidson, I'd like to stick with you because you have in the past, we have talked at a couple of venues about Missourians voting on about these initiatives, these referendums, and you have said that one of your interests is in reforming how initiatives and referendums get added to the ballot. Can you explain? 1 minute, sir.
Yeah, so the initiative petition process, I think as it stands, allows for our Missouri Constitution to be amended pretty flippantly, whether it's with bingo or what have you. And we've got a big book that is our Constitution. Law books are not what constitutions are. They're frameworks by which laws can be written. And so I also have seen, I think, even in just the last 4 years, what I would argue is an initiative petition process being taken advantage of. If you want to change the law, it costs about $5 or $6 million here in Missouri. And all you have to do is pay a series of petitioners to go out, come up with a clever marketing campaign. And at the end of the day, you're not getting a full consensus of the people. Our US Constitution requires 2/3 of both houses to be sent to the states, and then the states need to deliberate upon it, and 3/4 of them have to amend our Constitution. I'm not arguing that we need to make it that difficult of a process, but I do think we want more and a broader consensus. Right now, it's a simple majority that allows for our Constitution to be amended. I would encourage that that be 60% or 66% at a minimum. So,
Mr. Gragg, your response to that, what is your general opinion? Would you leave the process we have for initiatives and referendums unchanged? What are your thoughts?
I don't see any need to change it. What I actually see is a group of people who are abusing the legislative process by ramming through with the power of their supermajority. So yeah, what we have, this isn't just a marketing campaign. You don't get to dump money into a political process and poof, get exactly what you're wanting. Republicans have a supermajority. If they had legislators who were actually going out and doing the work and telling people, okay, this is why we think that Medicaid expansion is bad. This is why we think that Clean Missouri is bad. But they're not doing the work of going out and actually talking to voters. They're just telling them what they want to hear on a few very emotional issues, and then they do whatever they want to. Then the legislators do whatever they want to, and then complain about the legislative or about the referendum process that is powered directly from the people.
We got a question for Mr. Davidson from Ann. Ann is asking, and again, this is a question for Mr. Davidson. Does being pro-life extend to other vulnerable persons? For example, those who are unable to afford adequate health care? 2 minutes, sir.
I think the careful distinction to be made here is one is taking life, and the other is not guaranteeing by government medical service. And I would go further to say that we're going to provide better medical care to vulnerable communities, not by administering it through the state or broadening, I should say, broadening those who are on our rolls. I think we're going to accomplish that by implementing some of the various healthcare reforms I mentioned before. But really, it comes down to opening lines of communication between healthcare providers and patients themselves. And then I think strengthening those institutions that had always served the more vulnerable populations in their communities before. I think there's always a misunderstanding that conservatives hate people or something, or we don't like poor people, or we don't like people who find themselves on the margins. That's not the case at all. The question is, how do we help those who find themselves on the margins? And our answer is the state is not only an inefficient way of doing that, it's also a way that steals any sense of purpose from the process. The state cannot practice charity, and we can't practice charity through the state because I think it alienates the giver from the receiver. That's why I argue that community institutions that I've mentioned before are better avenues for helping people, not only from an efficiency mindset, in that those dollars are more effectively spent, and not going through circles paying all sorts of bureaucratic employees, but also from a sort of philosophical mindset that says it's more meaningful for people to help one another and help each other within their local contexts.
Mr. Gragg, in answering that question, Mr. Bishop asked a question and he provided his own answer. Let me go ahead and throw that question he asked to you. How do you manage providing health care to these people that are on the margins? 2 minutes.
So trying to parse through the winding road Bishop just took, the one thing that I agree on, I'm not a fan of government as a charity. Medicaid expansion is not a charity. Medicaid expansion is investing in the health of its citizens. And so that's why I was in favor of it. I am in favor of it because, again, when you have a healthier workforce and part of the and so I've got an insurance agency, so I'm a little more sympathetic with insurance companies than most folks. But part of the reason health insurance keeps going up, and there's a lot of waste in there, and don't tell me, and I'm not going to try and tell you there's not, but health care has gotten so expensive as well. And the only way insurance works is by passing that burden, that pain around as many people as possible. And so when you get, so give you a personal example. My son was born 2 months premature. He was supposed to be due in February, and I thought I was going to be able to get health insurance so that it would cover the birth. He was born in December, and so we had to put him on Medicaid, or put my wife and he on Medicaid for pregnant women. We spent a month in the NICU. As a business, that would have broken me. There's no way I could have paid for that out of pocket. But the investment by the state let me keep my business. It let me, because as an insurance agent, I have a fiduciary responsibility. Declaring bankruptcy to avoid a debt would have put me out of business. I would not have been able to sell insurance anymore. So that's how you help. You've got to help people. You got to give them a place to stand, and Medicaid expansion did that for a lot of people.
I want to throw a question to both of you guys. We got time for one more question, then closing statements. We'll start with Mr. Gragg. We got a question from Cara in the chat saying a lot of cities are trying to pass an internet tax in an attempt to make up lost sales taxes from local businesses because of people utilizing Amazon and so on. Are you personally in favor of that?
Well, you got to understand, the internet's still a pretty new thing. So yes, there is no real reasons that Missouri has not implemented a internet sales tax. I remember being a reporter in Dodge City, Kansas in 1999 and hearing about this issue, and we're still dealing with it 20 years later. It's one of the easy ways for the states to make some money, to supplement the budget that is got some serious issues coming up. And I understand Missouri has a whole lot of taxation districts that makes it more complicated, but it still should have happened a long time ago. Not only does it provide a needed revenue stream for our state budget, it puts our local retail on an even footing with folks like Amazon. And great, they may be contributing to the local economy, but they're not paying sales tax, or the folks who are buying from Amazon aren't paying sales tax. And we absolutely need to pass that Wayfair tax, and should have happened a long time ago.
Mr. Davidson, same question once again. Cara is asking if you support maybe a use tax for internet purchases in order to bolster local businesses.
Yeah, no, this is sort of a new and increasingly what Dave said there towards the ending. I think there's sort of a leveling of the playing field that needs to be accounted for. Just as I don't like I don't like corporate welfare either, I guess I should say. That being said, increasingly we do have physical locations of our vendors. So I know sales tax or internet sales tax typically is aimed at folks like Amazon and folks like Facebook. Well, as they have physical presences in the state, we're capturing those taxes. So while I'd want to avoid sort of a double taxation, if a vendor doesn't have any physical presence in the state, whereas before maybe we thought, oh no, they're just having a few sales here and there. I think we've moved to a place where the internet's so predominant in the economy that it starts to make sense.
Now, I want to go ahead and apologize to anybody that might be following this debate on a recording. I may have messed with the recording there just for a beat, but hopefully everybody's points got through okay. I want to go ahead and give you guys a moment for a closing statement. We had opened with Mr. Bishop, so we'll close with Mr. Gragg. Mr. Bishop, would you like to give the first closing statement? 2 minutes, sir.
Yeah, sure. No, I'm always happy to have these sorts of conversations and these public forums, and I hope that I've been a part of the campaign and a candidacy that has been open already for the last 14 months. And so I would encourage anyone to feel free to reach out to me to continue these conversations. And I know that I do have a sort of bias towards those who live in the district because I want to represent those constituents in a very particular way. But at the same time, if I get to be in Missouri's General Assembly, I'll also be making decisions on behalf of all Missourians too. So I want folks to feel comfortable and feel like they can talk with me about the issues. And in order to sort of foster that and facilitate that, I do have a phone number that I'm going to throw out there. Well, I can type it out there actually too. It's 417-647-1383. And I would encourage anyone to follow up with me by text or call. You can also email me at bishop@bishopformo. I'm typing it out as I go.com. And then lastly, I don't want to say lastly, but I am on Facebook Live every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. We call them fireside chats, and I intend to do that, and not only as a candidate, but also as a representative in the General Assembly. It may not be Tuesdays, maybe it'll switch to Sundays, but the idea is to be accessible, be available. And then for those in the district, I attend almost every city council meeting throughout the district. For instance, I'll be at Walnut Grove City Council meeting tomorrow night. And actually before that city council meeting, I have a public forum for any of the citizens out there in Walnut Grove as well. So in closing, I would say I've worked really hard to be accessible, and I can't promise to always agree, but I can promise to at least listen and give you an honest answer as far as where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Bishop. Mr. Gragg, 2 minutes for a closing statement, sir.
Again, thank you very much for having this. Like I said, this was not the campaign that I expected to wage when I made this decision in August. I'm going to throw this into debate territory instead of just a forum. Most of Bishop's answers have been theoretical. There isn't a whole lot of actual experience behind them. That's what and we're not going to agree on every issue. That's not how democracies work. This is about who can put in the work, who has the knowledge to be the best advocate in Western Greene County that we can. And I would say that I'm going to be able to do that. I've got years of working with government, watching government up close as a reporter. I've also got experience as a business owner and a lot more experience with insurance than I ever thought that I would, which is government, again, government is becoming more and more involved with. So looking forward to talking to more folks. I'm fairly easy to find on social media. There's not a whole lot of Graggs running around, but again, thank you very much for having the forum. Thank you to everybody who participated, and feel free to reach out as well.
And I want to just highlight for everybody, first of all, KSMU and at least OTC Politically Active's Facebook page will be broadcasting this at later times. So please check those recordings later. But mostly I just want to thank Mr. Bishop Davidson and Mr. Dave Gragg. Thank you both so much for participating, and best of luck in the weeks ahead. Thank you, everybody.